When trust is shattered and love turns into deception, what remains? Eleanor's journey forces a deeper question. Does revenge heal, or does truth set you free? As everything collapses, clarity emerges, revealing that loss is sometimes the path to self-discovery. In the end, it's not about destroying others, it's about reclaiming yourself.
And this evidence
If this
folder
story made
highlights
you
the key
reflect,
discrepancies.
like and share to support more meaningful
You don't
content.
understand the
Thanks
gravity
for
of this
watching.
situation.
The sound
Don't
of the
accept
breaking
the terms, we
glass
will
was
be forced to
lost to
litigate.
Caroline. All she could see was her husband's hand on another woman's pregnant stomach. It rested there, his thumb making gentle, slow circles. He once touched her just like that. She stood there, 8 months along with their baby, in a room filled with 500 people. She watched the billionaire she married lean in and whisper to his mistress. In that instant, a terrible realization hit her like a physical shock. Vivian was not just his affair, she was also pregnant with his child. What Caroline did next would dismantle a billion-dollar empire. But Preston Ashworth was completely unaware of a critical detail. For the last 3 months, his wife's crying was not about sorrow. It was a disguise she wore while she carefully gathered proof against him. She collected evidence, taped their talks, and made a record of every lie. The wife he called too sensitive and delicate was secretly plotting his total downfall. She walked out of the ballroom without saying anything. She did not yell, she did not cause a scene, and she gave no sign of the chaos to come. The next day, Preston Ashworth would learn that he had lost it all: his business, his family money, his good name, and even his liberty would be gone. This is the tale of how a wife's quietness turned into the strongest weapon imaginable. There is a powerful lesson in this story. It proves that silence does not equal weakness. Often the quietest individual is just getting ready for the most important battle. Your self-worth is not defined by the way another person sees you. It is shown in how you recover after being terribly misjudged. And the message goes even deeper. Any woman who has ever felt unseen in her own home will recognize a piece of her own story in Caroline's. Anyone who has been manipulated into questioning their own gut feeling will feel like their feelings are finally understood. This tale is evidence that you are never too damaged to put yourself back together. You are never so lost that you cannot find your way home. In the end, even the softest voice can make a world of difference. True success is not about getting even. It is about taking back control of your life. The champagne glass fell from Caroline's hand the second she saw Preston touching Vivian Marlowe's pregnant belly. The delicate crystal shattered against the sleek marble. The sound cut through the classical music like a sudden shriek. 500 sets of eyes immediately turned to where the noise came from. But Caroline did not notice the sudden wave of eyes on her. Her vision was locked on the scene across the room at the annual Ashworth Foundation charity event. She could only see Preston, his hand, and the other woman. The Metropolitan Ballroom was a display of incredible riches, with $10 million light fixtures shining down from the ceiling. Ladies in expensive dresses moved gracefully around tables covered in white silk. Waiters glided silently, with silver trays of food that was more expensive than most people's rent. It was the biggest social night of the year. And Caroline's husband was gently stroking another pregnant woman for everyone to see. She mentally counted how long his hand stayed there: 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. His thumb traced a slow, soft curve. Vivian gave a little laugh at something he whispered to her. Caroline knew that laugh well. It was the laugh Preston saved for when he was turning on the charm, for when he was being his real self. He had not shared a laugh like that with her in a very long time. A waiter was suddenly beside her. He quickly and professionally cleaned up the shattered glass. He avoided looking at her. Everyone did. The other guests were already back to their chats, absorbed in their own lives. The pregnant woman, with the broken glass already a forgotten detail. Her expensive silk dress suddenly felt like it was trapping her, and her baby bump. She had been carrying the heir to the Ashworth fortune for 32 weeks. She put a hand over her own belly to protect her child. The baby inside her kicked hard, almost as if it knew that something was terribly wrong. She took out her phone, opened it, and just looked at the blank screen. She closed it, then opened it again. What was she supposed to do? Send a message? Phone someone? Walk over there and ask why he was touching his director of special projects as if he owned her? She closed the phone. No application could solve this problem. At that very moment, Eleanor Ashworth seemed to appear out of nowhere next to her. Preston's mother glided through the event like a hunter, quiet and threatening. Her grip on Carolyn's arm was so tight it would surely leave a mark. "Smile, my dear," Eleanor ordered. Her voice was a bizarre combination of sugary sweetness and cutting cruelty. "You are making people stare." "Did you see that?" Caroline asked in a shaky whisper. "I saw you causing a fuss with your glass." "Preston?" He was with Vivian. His hand was on her stomach. Eleanor's fingers squeezed harder, but her flawless, painted smile never wavered. "You are wrong about what you believe you witnessed. Ashworth women do not create drama in public. Ashworth women do not point fingers. Ashworth women smile, they wave, and they act as if their lives are perfect. But I know what I saw." Eleanor let go of her arm, and her smile turned cold as ice. "You saw absolutely nothing. Now, I want you to go to the ladies' room, compose yourself, and return as the loving wife of Preston Ashworth III. You are carrying this family's future. Do not make me feel ashamed again." After giving her final command, Eleanor drifted away. She smoothly blended into a group of rich donors near the stage. Seconds later, she was laughing at a joke. She was the ideal hostess, the ideal socialite, and an ideal monster. Caroline started making her way across the ballroom, feeling like she was no longer even there. She walked by Preston's work colleagues, and they offered her quick, courteous greetings. She went past the spouses of his board members, who gave her insincere kisses in the air. She passed the mayor with his wife, the governor with his girlfriend, and a senator she could not name. Not one of them looked at her like a real person. She was just another part of the package. She was Preston's pregnant wife, a human decoration in the carefully staged play of his perfect existence. Then she saw Rachel near the bar. Rachel Whitmore was her closest friend from her university days. She was the one person in that whole place who saw the real her. Rachel was drinking a glass of whiskey. Her bright red hair was styled in an elegant bun. She was wearing an emerald green gown that Caroline had lent her. She glanced up when Caroline came near. "Carrie, you look like you just saw something awful." Rachel stopped, her face growing serious with worry. "What is wrong?" "I need to get out of here." "What is going on?" "I need to get out of this place immediately, Rachel." Rachel did not ask for any more details. She did not ask even one question. She simply took out her phone and texted Marcus, their driver. The car would be there in 3 minutes. Caroline turned and walked toward the door. The ballroom felt like it went on forever. Each step was like trying to walk through deep, heavy mud. She was forcing her way through the heavy air, through the ruins of the life she thought she had. To get to the exit, she had to go right by Preston. He was still standing with Vivian. He was still smiling, and his hand was still on her. He had moved his hand, and now it was placed on the lower part of Vivian's back. In a way that showed he owned her. It was the same way he used to touch Caroline, before she became invisible to him. Caroline walked so near that she could smell the expensive scent he wore. She was near enough to see a small red wine spot on his shirt collar. She was near enough to hear Vivian say, "Preston, you are unbelievable." He did not look up. He did not notice his pregnant wife passing by only 3 feet from him. He was completely unaware of her presence. "I have been so incredibly foolish," Caroline told herself. Every single clue had been right there for months. The late nights he claimed to be at work, the changed password on his cell phone. the fact that he never touched her in bed anymore. I noticed all the signs, but I decided to ignore them. She finally made it to the huge double doors. A doorman in a uniform opened one for her with a small nod. The chilly November air hit her face like a hand. It was like being violently shaken from a horrible, extended nightmare. At the doorway, she stopped and looked back. She gave one final glance at the sparkling ballroom, the bright crystal chandeliers, the tables covered in silk, and her husband sharing secrets with another woman. Preston laughed one more time. It was his real laugh, the one Caroline used to think was only for her. It was the laugh that she now realized was never hers at all. The large door closed behind her without a sound. Marcus was already waiting, holding the door of the car open. His face showed no emotion, as was his job, but his eyes were full of kindness. "Where would you like to go, Mrs. Ashworth?" Caroline paused for just a second. She could return to her home, the huge vacant apartment on Central Park West. She could return to the room she shared with a man who did not see her anymore. She could go to the baby's room that she had decorated all on her own because Preston was never available. No, that was not going to happen tonight. It was over. "Please drive me to my mother's house," she said, her voice perfectly calm. The driver, a man named Marcus, met her eyes in the rearview mirror, a look of surprise on his face. "Ma'am, that is a drive of 3 hours." "I know how long it takes," she replied. She settled back into the seat, and the cold leather sent a slight shiver through her. She pulled the heavy door closed with a quiet click. Marcus turned to face the road and said nothing more. The car glided away from the grand entrance of the Metropolitan Club. In the mirror, she saw the party's glittering lights shrink and then disappear completely. The sound of the string quartet faded away, and the champagne, the polite chatter, and all the awful lies melted into the darkness. Caroline rested both hands on her pregnant belly. The baby was completely still, as if it were listening, as if it were waiting to see what its mother would do next. "Oh, I am so very sorry," she whispered to the baby inside her, her palm lying flat against her stomach. "I'm sorry you have to go through this with me." But Caroline Ashworth was not going home. She would not cry in her own bed only to wake up and pretend that life was normal. She was done with the fake smiles and the elegant waves that defined her existence as the perfect Ashworth wife. She was getting ready for a war. The dark, empty highway stretched out ahead of them. Through the window, Carolyn watched the brilliant lights of the city dim and change to the softer glow of the suburbs. Soon the suburbs vanished as well, and only the deep black of the countryside remained. As the world outside changed, her phone began to buzz. Preston's name flashed on the screen. She ignored the buzzing. It buzzed a second time, then a third. She could see Marcus glancing at her in the mirror, but he kept his eyes on the road, remaining silent. A good driver knows when to become invisible. The buzzing finally stopped. A voicemail icon appeared, and then a text message followed. It was from Preston, just as she knew it would be. "Where are you?" The message read. "Your mother told me you left." Caroline stared at the words, her thumb hovering over the glass screen. She started to type a reply, then erased it. She tried again and deleted that one too. What could she even say? How could she possibly type the words, "I saw you with her. I saw you place your hand on her belly. I saw the way you looked at her. It was the exact same way you once looked at me." She pressed a button and the screen went dark. Let him wonder. Let him worry. The car drove past the hospital where she had seen her very first ultrasound. The memory was so vivid, it felt like a sharp pain in her gut. Preston had been right there beside her, holding her hand tightly. He had actually cried when the doctor let them hear their baby's tiny, fast heartbeat. "We are finally getting a family," he had promised her, his voice thick with emotion. "A real one, not like the one I had." That happened only 5 months ago. That was before the late nights at the office turned into every single night, before his phone was suddenly protected by a new password, and before a woman named Vivian Marlowe started working at Ashworth Industries. Caroline had looked her up online, 29 years old, a Stanford business degree. The woman had no social media, no digital footprint, nothing. It was like her entire online presence had been carefully erased. At the time, Caroline thought it was just unusual, that maybe the woman was simply a private person. Now she understood the real reason. You do not keep photo albums and public posts when you are sleeping with a married man. You leave no trail of evidence when you are part of his secret life. His hand on her stomach was not some simple, friendly gesture. It was a declaration. It was a sign of a secret that they shared, a symbol of a future they were building without her. And then, the horrible truth crashed down on her like a tidal wave. Oh my goodness, she is pregnant too. An icy chill spread through her body, and she felt her hands start to tremble. Her own baby started kicking, as if it could feel its mother's sudden wave of terror. Marcus, the driver, spoke with a soft, gentle voice. "Ma'am, do you need me to pull over?" "No," she managed to say, her voice tight. "Please, just keep driving." She made herself take a slow, deep breath, in through her nose and out through her mouth, just like her childbirth class instructor had taught her. She had gone to that class alone because Preston claimed he had a last-minute meeting that he just could not miss. Another message popped up on her phone. It was Preston again. "Are you okay? You should have let me know you were feeling sick." The audacity of that man. The absolute audacity. He had ignored her the entire evening, had not asked her for a single dance, and had not even bothered to introduce her to the new donors. He had failed at every basic duty of a husband, and now he was going to pretend to be the concerned partner. She remembered all the nights she had laid awake in bed, just listening for the sound of his key in the front door. She recalled the faint scent of another woman's perfume that clung to his suit jackets. She had told herself it was all in her head. She had convinced herself that she was just being paranoid. She had reasoned that pregnancy hormones make you emotional, and that she should just be thankful for the comfortable life he gave her. But then, she had found the prenuptial agreement. She discovered it 3 weeks ago, tucked away in a locked drawer in his home office. He had claimed he lost the key, but Preston was not the type of man to lose things. He was the type of man to hide them. So she had picked the lock, a trick her mother had taught her during a rebellious teenage year, a skill she never imagined she would actually need to use. The document was 47 pages long. It was a dense jungle of legal terms, clauses, and subclauses. But one section was perfectly clear. It was Article 12, the part about infidelity. It stated that if either party was proven to be unfaithful, the wronged person would receive 60% of their shared assets, and all other financial claims would become void. The agreement laid everything out with cold, cruel precision. Preston had told her it was just a standard document. He had called it a simple formality his lawyers insisted on. He had promised her it would never matter because he would never, ever be unfaithful to her. And she had believed him completely. She had signed the papers without even reading them. She had put all of her trust in the man who whispered promises of forever, while placing a 5-carat diamond on her finger. I was such a fool, she thought, so desperate for love that I ignored every warning sign. Then Caroline opened a folder on her phone. She had named it Insurance. Inside that folder was every piece of evidence she had been gathering for months. There were screenshots of credit card statements showing suspicious charges. There were photos of receipts from expensive restaurants she had never been to. There were email confirmations for hotel reservations right here in their own city. For the past 3 months, she had not been sitting at home feeling sorry for herself. She had been building her case. The very same day she found the prenup, she called her godfather, Theodore Callahan, known to everyone as Teddy. He was the lawyer who had managed her father's estate, and he had set up Preston's trust fund years before she ever met him. She had posed some hypothetical questions to him about prenuptial agreements, about clauses concerning infidelity, and about what might happen if a wife discovered her billionaire husband was cheating. Teddy's answers to her what-if scenarios had been very, very specific. Another text from Preston lit up her phone screen. "I am getting really worried. Please just call me." This time, she typed a reply and pressed send. "I am fine. I just felt tired and needed to get some air." It was not the complete truth, but it was not an outright lie. It was designed to keep him guessing. His reply was immediate. "Come back to the party. We need to present the foundation check for the photographers." Of course, it was always about public appearances. They had to be seen as the perfect, generous couple, donating $5 million to a children's hospital. But behind the scenes, one of them was stealing from that very same charity. That was the other secret Caroline had uncovered. It was a secret so enormous, it made his affair look like a small problem. The Ashworth Foundation was not just for good publicity. It was a front to launder money. Donations would come in, but only a tiny fraction of the funds ever reached an actual charity. The rest was quietly funneled into hidden offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Teddy helped her make sense of the tangled financial documents. Her friend Rachel helped her verify the suspicious wire transfers. And her mother, Margaret Brennan, who used to be a forensic accountant, helped her follow the money trail. All of them had been watching over her, waiting for the right moment to make a move, and protecting her in ways she was only now starting to understand. "I have already left for home," she sent in a text message. "I am so sorry. I really did not feel well." After sending it, she powered her phone all the way down. As the screen went dark, she felt the final connection to her former life snap. The car moved quietly through a small, peaceful town. They passed a gas station that was closed for the night, a diner with a buzzing neon sign, and a church whose tall white steeple seemed to glow in the darkness. The bright city lights blurred into streaks outside the car window. Out there, nobody knew that Caroline Ashworth's entire life had just crumbled. Or maybe this was the moment her life was actually beginning. She held the evidence tightly in her hands. It was far more than she needed to divorce her husband, Preston Ashworth. It was a powerful tool that could bring his whole world crashing down. His business, his good name, and even his personal freedom could all be gone. This was not just about ending a marriage. This was about dismantling an entire empire. Caroline pressed her forehead against the cool window. She felt the gentle stir of her unborn child inside her. The trembling in her hands finally started to subside. There were no more tears. She was done crying over that man for good. She had given years of her life to a man who saw her as nothing more than an attractive decoration. He needed a wife to bear him a child and keep up his flawless public reputation. But that chapter of her life was now closed. The journey to her mother's house was still 2 hours away. This gave her 2 full hours to review every last part of her plan to completely ruin Preston Ashworth. She shut her eyes, not to fall asleep, but to ready herself for the battle that was coming. She could see one light glowing from the porch. Her mother, Margaret Brennan, always left it on for her when she was on her way. The old farmhouse appeared just as she remembered it, painted a clean white with dark green shutters. The wind chimes her father had put up 30 years before were still moving gently in the breeze. The quiet melody of the wind chimes floated on the chilly November air. This is what a home was supposed to feel like. It was the complete opposite of the cold, impersonal penthouse with its expensive furniture and vast empty spaces. Her driver, Marcus, guided the car onto the gravel path. The sound of the tires crunching was the last thing she heard before he shut off the engine. Marcus was the first to speak. He inquired, "Should I wait for you, madam?" "That will not be necessary, Marcus. I will give you a call when I need a ride," she answered. She kept her next thought to herself. "If I ever decide to come back." The front door swung open before she could even take a single step. Her mother, Margaret, was standing right there in the doorway. She was a woman of 60 with her silver hair pulled back into a tidy braid. She had on a cozy flannel robe over a simple set of cotton pajamas. Her reading glasses were resting on the top of her head. "Well, "You are here now," Maggie stated. It was not a greeting, but more of a simple observation. Caroline walked carefully up the wooden steps. Her ankles were puffy, and a persistent ache had settled in her lower back. The baby had moved lower, making every single step a difficult effort. The very moment she was close enough for her mother to reach her, the strong emotional wall she had built around herself crumbled into pieces. The tears she had fought back at the party, in the car, and during months of pretending she was happy, finally started to flow. Maggie simply pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. She held her without saying a single word, as Caroline cried uncontrollably into her shoulder. The wind chimes played their soft, continuous song. Far off in the distance, an owl called out from an ancient oak tree. The night air felt unusually warm, like it was wrapping them in a soft blanket. "Let's get you inside," Maggie said, after a few moments. "I will make us some tea." The kitchen felt warm and secure. A fire crackled and popped inside the old wood stove. Sitting in the corner, the same copper pots that had belonged to her grandmother were hanging from the ceiling. Those were the very pots her mother had used to show her how to cook. Maggie moved about the kitchen with a comfortable, practiced ease. She filled the kettle with water, scooped chamomile leaves out of a glass jar, and picked up the honey pot that was shaped like a little bear. She took 2 mismatched blue cups from the cabinet. Both of them had tiny chips on the rim, which made them far too precious to ever get rid of. Carolyn lowered herself carefully into a chair at the old kitchen table. Countless important moments of her life had taken place in this very chair. She had wrestled with math homework, eaten more breakfast than she could count, and shared secrets about her first crush, her first broken heart, and eventually her engagement to Preston. Her mother had never warmed up to Preston. She had asked very specific questions that Caroline had brushed aside at the time. "What do you honestly know about his family? Has he ever taken you to meet any of his relatives? What does your gut instinct tell you about him?" Caroline's gut had been screaming at her to run away, but she had chosen to ignore it. She had been completely captivated by the charm and wealth of a handsome billionaire. He had a special talent for making her feel like she was the only woman in the world. "I really should have listened to you," she thought to herself as she watched her mother. She should have listened to her mom. She should have trusted her own feelings. That small inner voice that knew from the very start that something was not quite right. The kettle began to whistle. Maggie poured the hot water over the loose tea leaves. They sat together in silence for 4 minutes as the tea steeped. The only sounds were the steady ticking of the clock on the wall and the soft crackle of the fire. When the tea had turned a lovely amber color, Maggie pushed a warm mug across the table toward her daughter. Caroline cupped her cold hands around it, feeling the heat slowly seep into her fingers. "Mom," she started, her voice scratchy from crying, "I have to tell you something." "I know, my dear. I already know." Caroline glanced at her mother, her face a mask of confusion. "Know what?" In response, Maggie reached down and lifted a thick folder from the floor next to her chair. It was stuffed so full that papers were peeking out from its sides. She set it on the table with a solid, meaningful thud. "I worked as a forensic accountant for 32 years. I can spot financial fraud from a mile away. Your husband has been stealing from his own company since long before he ever laid eyes on you." Caroline could only stare at the folder, in a state of complete shock. "You have known about this the entire time?" "I suspected something was very wrong," Maggie said, correcting her gently. "So I started to do a little digging, and this is everything I found." Maggie opened the folder. It was filled with pages of spreadsheets, bank statements, and corporate records. The Ashworth Foundation has illegally moved $14 million into hidden accounts in other countries in just the past 3 years. And that glamorous charity gala you just attended? By this time next week, 70% of the funds raised tonight will be sitting in a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The numbers on the pages all started to blur together. Carolyn had discovered some of this on her own. Her findings were like small, ugly pieces of a giant, disturbing puzzle. But seeing her mother's thorough, undeniable proof made it all feel frighteningly real. Why did you not say anything to me? Her voice was so low it was almost a whisper. Because you needed to figure it out for yourself, Maggie answered. Her tone was gentle but firm. If I had presented this to you any earlier, you never would have believed me. You would have defended him. You would have insisted that I was mistaken, that I was just being an overprotective mother who was meddling in your life. Caroline remained silent because she knew her mother was absolutely right. She had constantly made excuses for Preston. She did it when her friends mentioned how distant he could be, or when she heard terrible rumors from people he worked with. She even made excuses for him to herself when she was all alone at night. Then Maggie added, "But that is not all." She flipped to a different section of the folder. This part contained only photographs. There was a woman getting into a fancy sports car. A man was holding the door open for her. A small boy was playing on a swing set. Her name is Vivian Marlowe, and she is a lot more than just his mistress. It felt like the entire world had stopped spinning for Caroline. What are you trying to say? He has been supporting her with money for 3 years. It began 2 years before he even met you. And they have a son who is 2 years old. Maggie paused, allowing the awful truth to settle in the air between them. He has a son. Preston goes to see him every other weekend. Those are the same weekends he tells you that he is going to play golf. The kitchen started to feel like it was tilting around her. The mug slipped right out of her trembling hands. Hot tea spilled all over the table. But she did not even feel it touch her skin. A son. Preston had another son, an entirely separate family. He was living a complete and utter lie, a whole other life right next to the one he shared with her. "No," she whispered. The word escaped her lips on its own. "No, that just is not possible. He would never do that." "The DNA results are a perfect match," Maggie stated. Her voice was steady and professional, just like it used to be when she gave testimony in a courtroom. "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago. He managed to get DNA samples from both of them. The little boy is 100% Preston's son." A sickening feeling washed over Caroline. She placed her hands over her pregnant stomach, a pointless gesture to shield her baby. This was the baby she believed was Preston's first child, his heir, the start of their family. But her baby was not the first. He was the second, or possibly even the third. The thought sent an icy shiver down her spine. How many more secrets was Preston keeping? How many other families did he have hidden away somewhere? "His name is William," Maggie said in a quiet voice. "He turned 2 years old this past September. For his birthday, Preston bought him a little toy electric car. He spent the whole day at Vivian's house putting it together for him." Hearing the month of September felt like a punch in the stomach. Back then, she had been 6 months pregnant. Preston had told her he was away at a business conference in Chicago. She had believed him without a single question. She never, ever had a reason to doubt him. The most difficult part is admitting that, deep down, I think I always knew something was wrong. There was always that small voice of doubt. Caroline finally found her voice. "What am I supposed to do now?" Her words sounded empty and far away, as if they belonged to another person. "That," her mother replied, "is completely up to you." Maggie shut the folder with a sharp final sound. "You have a very important choice to make. You could go back home to him, pretend you do not know anything, have your baby, and keep playing the part of Mrs. Preston Ashworth. You could do that until he decides to find a younger woman to take your place." "And what is the other choice?" Caroline asked. "The other choice is to fight for yourself. You can take every page in this folder and every secret you hold to bring that man to his knees. You can take away his money, his company, and even his freedom." Caroline looked at her mother, the woman who had raised her all by herself after her father died, the woman who worked 70 hours a week just to send her to a good school, the woman who taught her how to pick a lock and how to understand a company's financial reports. This was also the same woman who had taught her one very simple rule: never trust a man who refuses to show you his tax returns. "There is something else," Caroline said. "I discovered a detail you might not be aware of. It has to do with the family trust." A slow smile began to form on Maggie's face. So you did find that, didn't you? Your lawyer, Teddy, called me 3 weeks ago just after you started asking him all those questions that were supposedly just in theory. The morality clause. It is hidden deep inside the trust agreement. Any heir of the Ashworth family who causes a public scandal must give up their entire inheritance. Preston's father put it in there 20 years ago to control his son's wild behavior back in college. Preston has no clue it even exists. That is correct. Dominic never actually told him about it. He figured the simple threat of the clause would be enough to make him behave. Maggie just shook her head, unable to believe it. He really did not understand what a fool his own son could be. Caroline's baby was not the first child Preston had brought into the world. It was not even his second. And by the time the sun rose, Preston Ashworth would not just be losing a wife. He was on the verge of losing everything he had. The huge grandfather clock in the hallway struck 3 in the morning. Caroline had now been awake for 21 hours straight. Every part of her body was begging for sleep, but her mind would not stop racing. The kitchen table had become a war room, covered with towering stacks of documents. The only light in the otherwise dark room was the glow from laptop screens. An army of empty coffee cups was scattered all over the table. Rachel had shown up at 2 in the morning, after leaving a charity event early by pretending to have a migraine. She drove directly from the city with her laptop and a secret she had been hiding for the last 6 months. I was looking into Ashworth Industries for a news story, Rachel confessed, her voice full of regret. For the past half a year, I was going to tell you, Carrie. I just had to gather all of my proof first. Caroline's reply was empty and distant. Everyone was trying to protect me. Everyone except for the man I promised to share my life with. Rachel added her own stacks of files to the table. They were overflowing with financial records, printed out emails, and notes from interviews. She had managed to find former employees who had been paid money to sign agreements, promising to keep silent. The corruption is much worse than just the foundation, Rachel explained. For years, Ashworth Industries has been losing money from its investors. Preston took control from his father 5 years ago. Since then, the company has secretly moved at least $23 million. A large amount of that money went into his personal bank accounts. Some of it went to Vivian, and the rest was used to hide his other crimes. Caroline just stared at the papers. She saw names she did not recognize and numbers that made her feel dizzy. It was a confusing web of fake companies and foreign bank accounts that stretched across 3 different continents. How did nobody ever find out about this? She asked, mostly to herself. Oh, a few people did, Rachel replied. She tapped on a list of names on one of the pages. These were all employees who began to ask too many questions. Every single one of them was fired within 6 months. Most were given money and forced to sign agreements to never speak about it. A couple of them even attempted to go to the police, but their reports just vanished. Vanished? How can that happen? The Ashworth family has some very powerful friends. Dominic was a major contributor to 3 different attorneys general. Preston was just following his family's old plan, Rachel said with a serious expression. When you have that kind of money, you can make any problem disappear. I deserved much better than this. I deserved to be told the truth. A single clear thought started to take shape in Caroline's mind. She held onto it, like a person in the ocean clinging to a piece of driftwood. Maggie came back from her office, carrying another heavy pile of papers. I found the custody papers. What custody papers? Caroline asked, her face showing confusion. Maggie's expression was as cold as ice. The papers Preston's lawyers were preparing. He was planning to divorce you right after the baby was born. He was getting ready to sue you for complete custody of your own baby. His plan was to argue that you were mentally and emotionally unstable. A deep silence filled the room. Even Rachel, who had just been describing millions of dollars in corporate crime, looked completely stunned. He was going to take my baby away from me, Caroline whispered, as the words struggled to come out. He was definitely going to try, Maggie confirmed. She slid the legal papers across the table so Caroline could see them. His lawyers were collecting things to use against you. Your panic attacks during the pregnancy. That one time you called the doctor because you were afraid the baby had stopped kicking. The sleeping pills that were prescribed to you 3 months ago. Caroline remembered when she got those pills. She had been having horrible nightmares. She would wake up suddenly at 4 in the morning with her heart racing. Preston was the one who had suggested she talk to someone. He had even arranged for her to see a psychiatrist who was one of his good friends. That very same doctor was probably giving every detail from their private meetings directly to Preston's lawyers. The whole thing was a setup, she said quietly. From the very start, he never wanted a real family with me. He just wanted a child from a respectable woman. Someone who would look good in photographs, Rachel added, and someone who did not have the money to fight him. Your mother is doing well, but she does not have the kind of massive fortune the Ashworths have. Preston probably thought you would just accept whatever small amount of money he offered you, and then he assumed you would just go away without a fight. He assumed wrong, Caroline said, her voice now filled with a new kind of strength. She grabbed her phone, unlocked her private files, and started to look through months of evidence. I have recordings of him lying about his location. I have credit card bills for hotel rooms and expensive gifts that he certainly never gave to me. I have pictures of him and Vivian at restaurants where he claimed he was in business meetings. She looked over at her mother and her best friend. These were the two women who believed in her, even when she had stopped believing in herself. Between the three of us, we have more than enough proof to absolutely ruin him. The only thing left to decide is exactly how badly we want to destroy his life. The clock on the fireplace mantel showed it was 3:30. The last glowing coals in the fireplace gave off a soft red light. Outside, the first sign of dawn was beginning to show over the hills. Caroline's phone started to buzz. She had turned it back on about an hour earlier. A non-stop flood of alerts was now lighting up the screen. She had 16 missed calls from Preston. There were 12 voicemails, and she had 27 text messages. The feeling of his messages changed from worried to angry and finally to clear threats. "Play the voicemails out loud," Rachel said. "We need a record of how he is thinking." Caroline hit the speaker button. The first message played. "Caroline, where on earth are you? Your mother said you just left without saying a word. Please give me a call." His voice sounded normal, maybe a little annoyed, but he was still calm. The second message started. "I do not like being made to look like a fool. The foundation's fundraising event was very important. People saw that you were not there." The anger was starting to show, but his biggest worry was still how things looked to others. By the time they reached the fifth message, his attitude had completely shifted. "This is ridiculous. You are having another one of your dramatic reactions. Whatever you think you saw, you are mistaken." He was now talking down to her, using that superior tone he always took when she questioned him. The eighth message was basically a threat. "If you do not call me back very soon, or I will have to assume you are having one of your little spells again. Did you forget what Dr. Reynolds told you about keeping your anxiety in check?" He was trying to make her doubt her own mind, setting the stage for his story that she was unstable. The 12th and final voicemail started to play. "I am calling Dr. Pennington. It is clear the pregnancy hormones are messing with your thinking. You need to return home this instant." He was in full-on control mode, trying to turn her own doctor into a weapon to use on her. Rachel held up her phone, recording everything. He is already creating his narrative. If this ever went to court, he would argue she was unstable from day one. "In that case, we will make certain this never gets near a courtroom," Maggie said, her voice like ice. "We are going to leave him with nothing at all to fight with." Caroline looked down at her phone. She was staring at a photo of the man she had married, the man who was the father of her unborn child, and the complete monster she had been sleeping beside for 4 years. "Get in touch with Teddy," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Let him know that it is time to start." The phone call was short and to the point. Theodore Callahan answered on the very first ring, even though it was the middle of the night. It almost seemed like he had been expecting her to call. "I have been waiting for this moment," he told her. "Your prenuptial agreement includes a section that deals with infidelity. With the evidence you have now, you can demand 60% of every asset acquired during your marriage." "Tell me about the trust again," Caroline asked. "The morality clause is completely unbreakable. Dominic was very firm about it. If any kind of scandal is proven to be true, the heir loses all access to the money. The entire inheritance vanishes immediately. The family fortune, the company stock, every single property, it all gets handed over to charity." "Does Preston know about this?" she asked. The lawyer told her he has no idea. His father kept it a total secret from him. He thought that the threat of it would be enough to keep his son in line. Caroline looked at the papers that were laid out on her table. They showed proof of his affairs and all the details of his shady financial dealings. It was a perfect map of a life built on a mountain of lies. "I have just one last question, Teddy," Caroline said. "What is going to happen to the Ashworth Foundation when everyone finds out about the fraud?" He replied, "The money itself will be frozen during the investigation. Whatever is left over will probably be given to real charities." Teddy stopped for a moment. "Then again," he continued, "it might just be put under new leadership. A new director could make sure the funds are actually used to help people in need." He looked at her with meaning. "Someone just like you, if you are interested. You were a victim of all this, which gives you the legal right to take it over, and your experience running nonprofit groups makes you the perfect person for the job." Before she ever met Preston, Caroline had a job she loved at a charity that helped children learn to read. He talked her into quitting that job. He made a promise that she would never have to work another day in her life, saying he would provide for her completely. She realized now that it was just another way for him to control her, something she had mistaken for love back then. "Get the papers ready," she instructed. "Every last one of them. The divorce papers, the official complaint to the government, and the notice for the family trust. I want everything ready to be filed by morning." "I will take care of it," he promised her. She ended the call. The only sounds in the kitchen were the soft tick of the clock and the quiet crackle of the fire. By dawn, Caroline was going to do much more than just leave Preston. She was going to completely remove him from the history of the Ashworth family. The dark night sky began to change to a pale gray with streaks of pink. A brand new day was dawning. The most difficult night of her life was finally over. Her phone buzzed, and Preston's name flashed on the screen. She had been waiting for his call for hours, both afraid of it and knowing it was unavoidable. "You should probably take that call," Rachel said in a gentle voice. "We need to find out what he is going to do next." Caroline took a long, deep breath to steady herself. Then she answered the phone. "Where in the world are you?" Preston's voice was sharp and demanding. It was the same tone he used on his employees when they let him down, and now he was directing it at her. "I am somewhere I can be safe," Caroline answered, her voice perfectly level. "That is not what I asked. My mother is completely embarrassed. You vanished without a word to anyone. Now the whole town is gossiping." "So let them gossip," she replied. There was a long pause on the line. She could almost feel him thinking, trying to figure out a different way to handle her. "Caroline," he said, his voice lowering to a threatening growl. "You are coming home right now." "No." "What did you just say to me?" That one small word seemed to hang in the air, stopping time. Caroline had never really said no to Preston before. She had argued with him. She had tried to bargain with him. But she had never flatly refused him. "I said no, Preston. For the very first time in our marriage, I am saying no, and I will not be coming back." She heard a loud, crashing sound from his end of the phone, like he had hurled a glass against the wall. Preston always had a terrible temper. He was good at hiding it from the rest of the world, but behind their own closed doors, things were often broken. "Do you really think you can just leave me like this?" He let out a laugh, but it was a cold and nasty sound. You are walking away with absolutely nothing. Did you happen to forget that prenuptial agreement you signed? You are not getting a single dime. You and our baby are going to end up on the street. I remember the agreement, Preston. I remember every last word of it. I also remember the part about what happens if someone cheats. The part you told me did not matter, because you would never do that. The line went dead silent. I also remember the morality clause in your family's trust, the one your own father included. It is the clause you do not even know is there. The silence on his end of the line stretched on, longer than before. In her mind's eye, she pictured him completely still, caught in a wave of fear, scrambling to understand what she had discovered. "Oh, and one more thing," Caroline said, her tone perfectly calm. "How is your other son? He must be around 3 years old now. I believe his name is William Wright. He is the child you see on the weekends you claim to be golfing." Then the line went dead. Caroline stared at her phone. Her hands trembled and her heart hammered against her ribs, yet a small, triumphant smile played on her lips. She had made her move. Preston had until dawn to give up, but she was certain he would not. The following 2 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Teddy sent over all the necessary legal documents through email. Meanwhile, Rachel put the finishing touches on her public announcement. Maggie compiled every piece of financial proof. Caroline went over everything for the very last time, signing papers where needed and giving her go-ahead on each step of their strategy. At 6 in the morning, she officially filed to end her marriage. The legal papers were dispatched electronically, landing simultaneously in the email accounts of Preston's lawyer, the family trust administrator, and the government's whistleblower agency. By 6:30, her phone began to ring. It was not Preston calling. It was his father, Dominic Ashworth, and his tone was icy. "What on earth do you believe you are accomplishing, he demanded. Caroline replied coolly, "A very good morning to you too, Dominic. I assume Preston has already told you about our little chat. You are making a huge mistake," he snarled into the phone. "You do not have any idea who you are dealing with." "Oh, but I know exactly who I am dealing with," she shot back. "I am dealing with a family whose entire fortune was created with a web of lies, a husband who had a whole secret family while he was pretending to be a devoted spouse, and a father who is more concerned with his public image than he is with what is right. You are going to regret this. I will see to that myself." "You will see to what, exactly? Are you going to sue me? Are you going to threaten me? Are you going to try to claim that I am not a fit mother?" Caroline's voice was powerful and did not shake. "I have proof of every single illegal act your family has ever committed. I have files going back for the last 10 years. I have bank records, recorded phone calls, and people who are willing to go to court. If anything happens to me or to my baby, all of it gets released. It will be sent to every television station, every newspaper, and every single government office." The line was completely quiet. "Your son is not just losing his wife, Dominic. He is about to lose his money, his company, and his freedom. The only thing left to decide is if you want to sink right along with him." She hung up before he could even answer. Rachel just looked at her, her mouth hanging open in shock. "I have never seen you act like this before. I have never felt this angry before," Caroline admitted, sinking down into a chair at the kitchen table. A powerful wave of exhaustion suddenly hit her. She became aware of how many hours she had been awake. "Or maybe I have been angry," she said, her voice becoming much softer. "Maybe this anger has been slowly growing inside of me for years, and I just refuse to acknowledge it." Maggie placed a fresh mug of coffee in front of her and gave her shoulder a comforting squeeze. "That anger is a good thing," Maggie said quietly. "It shows that you are finally standing up for yourself." But right as her mother said those words, Caroline felt the anger start to change into something else. The fury was just the surface. Beneath it was a deep sadness for everything she had lost, for the future she had once dreamed of. After all the hurt he had put her through, a part of her had genuinely loved Preston. She had overlooked countless warning signs, silencing her own instincts in the quiet of the night. She had fallen for the man she believed him to be, an image he had crafted with perfect skill. But that man was an illusion. She was grieving someone who never truly existed. At 7 in the morning, a large black car pulled up to the curb in front of Maggie's house. Caroline observed it from the window. 3 men in expensive suits got out. They were the kind of suits Preston's attorneys wore when their goal was to intimidate someone. They walked up the path and gave a sharp knock on the door. They appeared polished and self-assured, likely expecting to handle a hysterical wife making a scene. They had no clue what was really waiting for them inside. Caroline answered the door herself. She was 8 months pregnant, dressed in a worn-out sweatshirt and a pair of borrowed jeans. Her hair was not combed, and her eyes were puffy from a sleepless night. Yet despite her appearance, she had never felt more in control of her own destiny. The head lawyer was the first to speak, his tone cold and formal. "Mrs. Ashworth, your husband insists that you come home immediately. He is willing to forgive you for this minor incident." Caroline nearly laughed out loud. "Forgive me? I do not require his forgiveness." The lawyer continued. "He also wanted us to tell you that if you pursue any legal action, he will demonstrate to the court that you are an unfit mother. He intends to use your pregnancy and your recent unpredictable behavior against you. He has multiple witnesses prepared to testify that you left a party without any logical reason," the lawyer continued to threaten. "They will all say that you have been emotionally unstable." Caroline answered with a calm voice. "In that situation, please tell him that I have a forensic accountant, a top investigative journalist, and the very same lawyer who set up his family's trust. You should also inform him that I have already filed all the necessary paperwork." The lawyer just stared, obviously taken by surprise. "Filed what?" Caroline let a small smile touch her lips. "Everything. The divorce papers, which contain absolute proof of his affair, a formal report regarding his charity's illegal financial activities, and a highly detailed email sent to his father explaining the morality clause in their business agreement." The lawyers shot nervous looks at each other. A silent wave of doubt, and maybe even a little fear, passed between them. "Mr. Ashworth is open to negotiating a settlement," the main lawyer said, now picking his words with great care. "There is nothing left to negotiate," Caroline replied. "This game is finished, and I have already won." With those words, she shut the door firmly in their faces. She peered through the window as they hurried back to their vehicle. They were speaking frantically into their phones, making wild gestures, but their car did not move. They were waiting for new orders. Preston's chance to surrender ended at sunrise. The sun was up. The real battle had now begun. The lawyers returned to her door 3 more times. Each time they came back, their offer got bigger, finally hitting $20 million. The offer then climbed to $30 million, and at last, $50 million, if she would simply drop the entire matter. Caroline turned down every single one. "You could just accept the money, you know," Rachel said. They had relocated to the living room, since the kitchen table was buried under a mountain of legal papers. $50 million would allow you to start a new life wherever you chose. "This was never about the money," Caroline stated, her gaze fixed on the black car and the desperate men outside. "This is about doing what is right." "Doing the right thing can come at a steep cost," Maggie cautioned her. "It can wear you out, and even then, sometimes you do not succeed in the end." "Then I will wear myself out trying," Caroline replied, her voice filled with determination. The morning news broadcast began, and Rachel increased the volume. A financial analyst was talking about strange activity with the Ashworth Industries stock. "Sources within the corporation say the stock has been extremely volatile today," the reporter announced. "There are whispers of a federal probe, though the company has declined to comment." It was working. The first cracks were showing in the family's business empire. At 9:30 in the morning, her phone buzzed. It was Bennett Cross, the chief financial officer of the company. Caroline knew his name from company functions. He was a shy, worried man who perpetually looked like he was bracing for bad news. "Caroline," he started, his voice a rushed whisper. "We have to talk," he pleaded. "How did you get this number?" she asked, completely stunned by his call. "I have had it for a couple of years." since that company holiday event. He hesitated for a moment. I tried to warn you that evening. I wanted to tell you about the money, about what Preston was doing, but you did not understand what I was trying to say. The memory of that night came rushing back to her. She recalled Bennett attempting to talk to her, stumbling over his words. Back then, she had thought he was just socially awkward. Well, I understand now, she said to him. I have evidence, he said, his voice filled with years of suppressed guilt. I made copies of everything Preston thought he deleted, every secret account. I have held onto these records for 3 years. His voice broke as he spoke the last few words. I stayed with the company because I believed I could fix things from the inside to shield the employees who had no idea what was happening. But it all just got worse. Why are you deciding to share this with me now? Because you are the only one who has a real opportunity to make him stop, Bennett answered, his breath shaky, and because you were always nice to me at those corporate events. Everyone else acted like I was not even there, but you would always inquire about my family. You even remembered my daughter's name. Caroline had no recollection of these simple acts of kindness, these brief moments of human connection she had offered while playing the role of Mrs. Preston Ashworth. I will be a witness for you, Bennett vowed. Whatever is required, I will tell them the whole truth. Thank you, Bennett. Thank you for having the courage to fight. Someone needed to, he replied. The second she ended the call, she saw Rachel was already writing notes. Having the chief financial officer testify will change everything, Rachel said. This is a testimony from a corporate insider. It grants us access to records we never would have been able to get. He is also a man who is risking his entire career to do the right thing. Caroline felt a change within herself. He had spent years trying to fix the company, just like I spent years trying to fix my marriage. We were both caught in the same kind of trap, designed by the same person. When the doorbell rang once more, Caroline's entire body went rigid. She prepared herself for more lawyers, with even larger settlement figures, trying to buy her silence. But the individual standing on her porch was not an attorney. It was Eleanor Ashworth. Preston's mother was there, looking utterly perfect. She had on a fashionable coat, carried a Chanel purse, and wore her trademark pearl necklace. She was the very picture of a wealthy family matriarch. Maggie moved in front of Caroline without thinking. I do not think you are welcome in this house. I am not here to make trouble. Eleanor's tone was different. It was softer and more vulnerable than Caroline had ever known it to be. I am here to help. Caroline stepped out from behind her mother. Why in the world would you want to help me? For a fleeting moment, Eleanor's perfect composure seemed to break. It only lasted for a second, but it was long enough for Caroline to glimpse the deep exhaustion she had been hiding. Because my grandchild should have a much better life than anything Preston can provide. Because for 40 years, I have been cleaning up the messes made by the Ashworth men, and I am finished. Because I am aware of all their secrets, and it is time the rest of the world knew them as well. She presented a small silver flash drive that seemed heavy with unspoken truths. Bank records, offshore accounts, private deals. Everything Dominic has kept hidden for decades. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly. I married into this family when I was only 22 years old. I have been a prisoner in their world ever since. Perhaps this is my chance to begin making things right. Caroline accepted the small device from her. Why do this at this moment? Why not years ago? Because years ago, I was terrified of Dominic. I was afraid of losing my position in society, of becoming a nobody. Tears began to well up in Eleanor's eyes. But my grandson will be here soon, and I will not allow him to be brought up in the same poisonous environment that ruined my own son. It was the most sincere statement Caroline had ever heard Eleanor make. I cannot forgive you, Caroline said to her plainly. Not for all the years you knew what was happening, and for every time you told me to just put on a smile and perform my part. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I am asking for a chance to do one thing correctly. Eleanor straightened her posture, her decision made. I will do whatever is necessary to help you dismantle that family. I will risk everything, even my own reputation." The house had been silent for some time. The lawyers were gone, their car no longer in the driveway. It was a calm morning, the quiet broken only by the sound of birdsong. Carolyn glanced at the flash drive in her hand, then at the exhausted face of her mother-in-law. She took a deep breath, thinking of the life she was about to bring to ruin. This was not a negotiation. There would be no retreat. "Please come in," Caroline said, her voice firm. "We have a great deal to do." They worked together until noon. After they finished, Eleanor departed, Rachel returned to her own home, and Maggie went to her office to examine the fresh evidence. At last, Caroline was completely alone in the house. She climbed the stairs to the bedroom she had grown up in. The pink wallpaper she had chosen when she was 12 years old still decorated the walls. On the bed lay the quilt her grandmother had stitched by hand. From the window, she could see the same rolling fields she had watched as a girl, dreaming of a life somewhere else. She had run from this peaceful life to a glamorous penthouse overlooking Central Park. She had been given a 5-carat diamond ring and a marriage founded on an empire of deceit. The initial surge of adrenaline was gone, and her anger had subsided. In its place was a heavy, aching sadness. Caroline slowly sat down on the edge of her childhood bed. She placed her hands on her belly, feeling the soft movement of her daughter inside. "I loved him," she whispered to the empty room. "I loved him with my whole heart. How could I have been so blind?" And that is when the tears began to fall. They were not the quiet, graceful tears you see in movies. They were wrenching, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. A lifetime of unspoken pain finally burst forward. She cried for the wedding that she thought was a fairy tale come true. She cried for their honeymoon in Bali, where Preston had treated her like a queen. She cried for the memory of his proposal on his yacht, beneath a sky full of stars, where he promised her a future that was always a lie. She wept for the day she saw the positive pregnancy test, a moment she had to experience by herself because he was away on another so-called business trip. She cried for every ultrasound he made an excuse to miss. She cried for the nursery she had painted and assembled on her own while he was spending his time with Vivian. Then her tears shifted. She began to cry for the woman she was before she ever met him. She had been strong and self-reliant, a woman who loved her job at a nonprofit, her cozy little apartment, and her simple, happy life. That woman had disappeared, buried under 4 years of Preston Ashworth's constant criticism, his demanding social life, and his impossible standards. Somewhere along the way, she had completely lost sight of herself. The baby kicked again, a stronger thump this time, as if she could feel her mother's emotional turmoil. Caroline made herself take a slow, deep breath, searching for a moment of calm. She had to remember that a small person was counting on her to be strong. Her mother, Maggie, appeared silently in the doorway. She did not speak. She simply crossed the room, sat beside Caroline on the bed, and put a comforting arm around her as she continued to cry. "I threw away 4 years of my life, Mom." "No, honey, you did not throw them away," Maggie said, gently stroking her hair. "You survived them. There was a huge difference. I should have known sooner. I should have left him so long ago." "Perhaps," Maggie replied softly. "Or perhaps you needed to wait for this very moment. This is the moment when you are finally strong enough to fight back for yourself." Maggie's voice was calm and reassuring. "The version of you that he married could never have done this. You had to become someone much more powerful first." Caroline considered her mother's words. She thought of the naive young woman who signed a prenuptial agreement without even glancing at it. The woman who accepted every lie because she desperately wanted it all to be real. That woman had been vulnerable and desperate for affection. The woman she was today was not that person anymore. "I am so scared," Caroline confessed in a quiet voice. "I am scared of what is going to happen. I am scared of raising this baby by myself. And I am scared to be the person who brought down the entire Ashworth dynasty." It is all right to be scared. Fear just means you understand how high the stakes are. Maggie shifted to look directly into her daughter's eyes. But you will not go through this by yourself. You have me, you have Rachel, you have Teddy and Bennett, and you even have Eleanor, bless her heart. But what if I am not strong enough? But what if you are? Caroline had no reply to that. She had not allowed herself to think about a future beyond the next few terrible hours. She had not let herself dream about what winning would look like. Go take a long hot shower, Maggie suggested. Change into something comfortable and get some food. Then we will figure out our next move together. She left the room, allowing Caroline some time alone. Caroline sat for another minute, building up the courage she knew she would need. The shower was hot, the water so intense it almost felt like it was stinging her skin. She let the powerful stream run over her until her skin was pink, until all the tears were gone, and until she felt truly clean for the first time in years. She dressed herself in clothes from her old life, a familiar pair of jeans stretched tightly over her belly, and she put on a faded sweatshirt from her college days. She looked at herself in the mirror. She did not quite know the woman staring back, but she decided that was probably for the best. For 4 years, she had worked so hard at playing the part of Caroline Ashworth. It was time to find the real her again. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the story was everywhere. An anonymous tip had delivered the documents to every major financial news organization. The Securities and Exchange Commission immediately launched a full investigation into Ashworth Industries. Within a single hour, the company's stock had dropped by 15%. Members of the board were resigning, and the company's lawyers had vanished. From the safety of Maggie's living room, Carolyn watched the empire begin to crumble. Rachel sat with her, her phone buzzing endlessly with messages from her boss. "I did not release anything," Rachel said. "My strategy was to wait until morning. I wanted to give Preston more time to make his situation even worse. So, who leaked it?" A short text message from Teddy provided the shocking answer. It was Eleanor. In the end, Preston's own mother had made a choice to protect her grandchild instead of her son. Caroline could only look at her phone in complete disbelief. This was the same mother-in-law who had always advised her to just smile and maintain appearances. For 40 years, she had put her perfect public image above all else. But when the choice really mattered, she had chosen what was right over what looked good. On the television, a reporter was broadcasting live from outside the Ashworth Industries building. A huge crowd of journalists swarmed the entrance as confused employees poured out of the offices. The entire corporate empire was falling apart in real time. Then, a picture of Preston appeared on the screen. It was an older photograph from a better time, when he looked dashing and full of confidence. He was the charming, perfect son from a well-respected family. The news anchor's voice narrated his stunning downfall. "We are receiving reports that Preston Ashworth III is likely to face criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. His wife filed for divorce early this morning, claiming infidelity and financial wrongdoing. His wife, for a little while longer, that title still belonged to her." Right at that moment, her phone started ringing. It was Preston calling again. This time, she picked up. "Carrie." His voice was unrecognizable, hollow and broken. All of his usual arrogance was gone. "Please, just let me explain." "No, I do not think you can. The company, my father, you do not know the kind of pressure I have been dealing with. What I know is that you faced a choice every single morning, and every single morning you chose to deceive me. I love you." A sound that was half a laugh and half a sob escaped Caroline's lips. That word had no meaning coming from him. It likely never did. "No, Preston, you loved the concept of me. I was the perfect accessory for your perfect life, the image you needed to maintain your career." Her voice was clear and powerful. "You never loved the woman I really am. You do not even know her. I can change. We can try therapy. We can fix this. It is much too late for that. It was too late the second you laid your hand on that other woman's stomach." The other end of the phone call fell completely silent, Then, Caroline heard a sound she had never imagined coming from Preston Ashworth. He was weeping. "Please," he pleaded, "I am about to lose everything." "You already lost me, and that happened months ago. You just were not paying close enough attention to see it." She hung up the phone. The news report kept rolling, offering more details, playing more clips, and featuring more experts who analyzed the collapse of a legendary family. At 5 o'clock in the evening, the board of Ashworth Industries convened an emergency meeting. At 6:30, they announced Preston had been terminated as chief executive officer. At 7 o'clock, Dominic Ashworth released a public statement denouncing his son's behavior and separating the family's name from the growing scandal. At 8 o'clock, Teddy arrived holding the documents that would officially end her marriage. He smiled proudly and said, "They agreed to every single thing you asked for." The conditions were written in plain language. She would receive 60% of all their shared property, exactly as their prenuptial agreement stated. Caroline was granted full custody of their child, and Preston was forbidden from any visits until he passed a thorough psychological review. The apartment in New York, the vacation house in Florida, and complete control of the family's charity foundation were now all hers. Caroline read every word of the documents, checking each line carefully. It was everything she wanted, and everything she had fought so hard to get. Teddy added, "Preston is also being cut off from his inheritance. There was a morality clause in the family trust, and they made it official this afternoon. He was now, for all practical purposes, broke, aside from any money he had successfully hidden in accounts overseas. But even those accounts were now frozen because of an investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission. He would be fortunate to even find the money for a public defender." Caroline signed the documents with a steady hand, her movements smooth and filled with confidence. Her mother opened a bottle of wine, but they did not raise their glasses in a toast. This was not a time for celebrating. It was simply the end. It was the last page of a very painful chapter, which had to be turned so a new one could start. At 9 o'clock that night, Rachel's article was published online. It was a brilliant piece of investigative work, exposing the secret family, the financial crimes, and all the lies in cold, hard detail. By midnight, Preston Ashworth's reputation was destroyed forever. Carolyn looked out the window into the dark night sky. Stars sparkled above as her wind chimes played a gentle song. She had actually done it. She had gone against all the odds, taking on a billion-dollar company and a family that had paid its way out of every problem for generations. She placed both hands on her stomach, and her daughter answered with a soft kick. "It is all over now," she whispered to her baby. "He can never hurt us again." But as she spoke those words, she knew it was not entirely true. The legal fight would probably drag on for months, maybe even for years. There would be more meetings with lawyers, more days spent in a courtroom, and more hearings about custody. Preston would definitely not go down without a fight. His father had more than enough money to pay for a legal battle that could last forever. The Ashworth business empire would keep on growing, even with its leader out of the picture. But Caroline had a kind of power that money could never buy. She had the truth on her side. She was surrounded by people who truly loved and supported her. And most importantly, she would be raising a daughter who would know her mother as a survivor, not as a victim. For Caroline, that was not just enough. It was everything. 1 week later, Caroline was at Dr. Pennington's office for a routine checkup. The baby was perfectly healthy, kicking with energy as if she was excited to come into the world. Dr. Pennington said softly, "You have been through an incredible amount of stress. So how are you handling everything?" the doctor asked. Caroline thought for a moment before answering, "I feel a lot better than I think I should." "Is that weird? Shouldn't I be more broken up by all of this?" Dr. Pennington reassured her, while making a note on her chart. "There is no right way to deal with loss. Everyone gets through it in their own way. But honestly, I have not seen you look this peaceful in a very long time." It was the absolute truth. The heavy cloud of anxiety that had followed her for months was finally gone. The nights without sleep, the racing mind, and the constant sense that something was deeply wrong had all disappeared. I kept telling myself it was just pregnancy hormones, Caroline admitted. All of that anxiety. Preston always said it was the hormones. What you were feeling was a completely normal response to a terrible reality, the doctor explained. Your body knew something was wrong, even when your mind was trying to deny it. Caroline remembered all the nights she had laid awake, scrolling through her phone at 3 in the morning. She recalled pretending to be asleep when Preston would finally get home. Her intuition had been screaming at her, but she had chosen to ignore it. She made a silent promise to herself that from now on, she would always trust her gut feelings. Later that afternoon, she knew she needed to meet with Vivian Marlowe. It was a decision that no one supported. Not Maggie, not Rachel, and definitely not Teddy. Even Eleanor, who had a strained relationship with her son's other women, told her it was a horrible idea. But Carolyn had to know the full story. She needed to look into the eyes of the woman who was part of her husband's secret world. They arranged to meet at a little cafe in a quiet part of town, a neutral place where no one would be watching. Vivian looked older than her 29 years. She appeared exhausted and filled with worry. Her hand trembled as she picked up her coffee cup. Before Caroline could even speak, Vivian said, "I never knew. About the financial crimes? Or about what he was planning to do to you? I really believed—" Her voice trailed off before she could finish. "I believed I was the one he truly loved. He convinced me that you were just part of a business deal." "Is that what he told you?" Caroline asked in a soft voice. Vivian's eyes began to well up with tears. "He said all the things I was desperate to hear," she confessed. "He told me there was no love between you two, that your marriage was only for show. He promised that after the baby was born, he would leave you so that we could be a real family." "And what about your son, William?" The tears finally spilled and streamed down Vivian's cheeks. "He almost never sees him. He sends money and gifts, but he never actually comes to visit." "He never really has." Caroline truly looked at the woman sitting across from her. This was not some wicked person trying to destroy her life. She was just another person caught in Preston's web of lies. Another soul who had fallen for his empty promises. "I am not going to forgive you," Caroline stated, her voice calm and firm. "I cannot do that. You knew he was a married man. You made your choices." Vivian slowly nodded her head, accepting the truth in Caroline's words. "I know. But what I can do is recognize that you were also his victim, just in a different way." A clear change came over Vivian's face. Perhaps it was relief, or maybe it was the comfort of finally hearing a truth she had tried so hard to ignore. "What will you do now?" Caroline asked. "I am taking William to Oregon to live with my parents. We both need a new beginning," Vivian replied, drying her eyes. "I do not want anything from him. Not his money or his influence. I just want to be free." "In that case, I genuinely hope you find that freedom," Caroline said. They did not hug or share phone numbers, and they did not plan to talk ever again. Some connections are simply too broken to ever be mended. As she drove back to her mother's house, Caroline felt something she had not expected. It was not forgiveness. It was a profound and powerful feeling of release. She was finally letting go of the anger she had been holding onto for someone who no longer deserved any space in her heart. Her apartment back in New York was already being renovated for her return. Caroline hired a new group of designers, real professionals, not the ones her mother-in-law Eleanor had picked out. For the very first time, she was choosing her own colors, her own furniture, and her own future. "Are you sure you are ready for this?" Maggie asked as they loaded the last of the boxes into the car. "Not entirely, but I have to go back," Caroline replied, placing the final box inside. "This baby will be here in 4 weeks. I need to be settled in my own home." "That apartment was never really your home, sweetie." "I know," Caroline said with a faint smile. "But I'm going to make it my own. It will be filled with my things, my happiness, and my life. I am going to turn it into a place that is 100% me." Maggie gave her a long, tight hug, an embrace between a mother and a daughter who had both triumphed over their own immense struggles. "You call me for anything at all," she demanded. "I promise. I mean it. Anything. If it is 3 in the morning and you need to talk, I will be there. I know you will be, Mom. I love you. I love you more. Always and forever." The drive back to the city took about 3 hours. Caroline watched as the green hills gradually turned into suburbs, which then transformed into the city's massive skyscrapers. She was on the very same highway she had traveled just a week before, but this time, everything was different. She had left her mother's house in silence, just as she had arrived. This time, however, the silence was not heavy with fear. It was full of peace. 3 months later, a completely different woman opened the apartment door on Central Park West. She was holding her baby daughter, Ruby Margaret Brennan. The Ashworth name was now nothing but a memory. This apartment was more than just a place to live now. It was a real home. The cold, sterile white walls were painted a soft, inviting cream. The harsh, modern furniture was gone, replaced by comfortable pieces she had found in little antique shops. Her shelves were now filled with photos of family, capturing real smiles and joyful moments, not the stiff poses from a magazine. Carolyn held Ruby close and walked to the window. The view outside was the same. Central Park was still a giant green rectangle far below. The city still buzzed with its endless, powerful hum, but the way she saw it had changed completely. She finally understood that the gilded cage she thought had trapped her was never really locked. She had the key all along, and at last she had used it to set herself free. Ruby began to fuss a little, letting her know it was time for a feeding. Carolyn sank into the old wooden rocking chair her mother had sent. It was the exact same chair Maggie had used to rock her to sleep when she was a baby. She felt a deep connection between 3 generations of strong women, all tied together by love. As she nursed her baby, she thought about the person she used to be. She saw the woman who had walked into that gala, 8 months pregnant, feeling completely invisible. She could almost hear the champagne glass shattering on the floor, a sound that felt like her whole world breaking apart. That woman had been so full of fear and desperation, trying to hold on to a marriage that was never real. The woman in this chair today was not that person anymore. The doorbell rang, signaling that Teddy had arrived for their weekly meeting. He carried a stack of paperwork for the foundation, which was now officially called the Brennan Family Foundation. The Ashworth name, and all the pain that came with it, was erased from her life for good. The foundation had already sent out its first grants last month. The money was given to women's shelters, financial education programs, and support groups for mothers escaping bad situations. It was making a real difference for people who desperately needed help. "Preston's trial starts next month," Teddy said, always gentle when he brought it up. "The prosecutors are going to want you to testify." "I'm sure they will," she replied with a calm voice. "And will you do it?" Caroline looked down at Ruby's perfect sleeping face. "Of course," she answered, her voice completely steady as she moved the baby to her shoulder. "One day my daughter is going to ask about her father. I have to be able to look her in the eyes and tell her I was honest. I need her to know that I faced the truth, that I fought for what was right, and that I showed the world exactly who he was." Teddy warned her, "You know this is not going to be easy. His lawyers will try to paint you as a scorned woman out for revenge, just like they threatened." "Let them try," she said with a quiet strength. "I have evidence. I have people who will support my story, and I am not hiding anything." A smile appeared on Teddy's face. "You have really changed, Caroline." "No," she corrected him, looking right at him. "I have just remembered the woman I was before I ever met him, before his lies made me forget myself." A soft voice had told her earlier, "The woman you used to be is not gone. She was just waiting in the shadows for her moment." After her guest left, Caroline carefully placed her baby, Ruby, into her crib for a nap. She gazed out the window, watching the sun sink below the skyline, painting the sky in bright streaks of orange and gold. Her phone suddenly buzzed with a text from her friend Rachel. The message said, "You need to see the news tomorrow. We won a Pulitzer Prize. The investigative story they had published, the one that brought the Ashworth empire to its knees, had won the highest honor in journalism. A second message popped up. It was from Bennett Cross, confirming he was cooperating with the police. The board of directors had made their final decision. Ashworth Industries was being shut down for good. The consequences just kept spreading. The son, Dominic, was also facing criminal charges. The once great empire was turning to dust. The father's reputation was destroyed, and his son was going to trial. Everything Preston had valued more than his wife, more than his own family, and more than basic human decency, was gone. Her phone lit up again with a text from a number she did not know. She almost ignored it, but something told her to open it. It was a message from Vivian. It was short and said, "Thank you for not destroying my life along with his. I am getting the help that I need. William and I are trying to fix our marriage. You gave us a second chance." Caroline put her phone down. She went into the nursery to watch her sleeping daughter, and a feeling of peace washed over her. She thought about that terrible night at the party and realized how much had changed. She could still hear the sound of the champagne glass as it dropped and broke on the shiny floor. She could still remember the quiet click of the huge ballroom door shutting behind her. The person who went into that room was just Preston Ashworth's pregnant wife. She was like another one of his beautiful possessions, there to make him look good and give him a son. But the person who walked out of that room was someone completely different. She was Caroline again, a woman who would never be ignored, pushed aside, or silenced again. She felt a small movement from within her. Caroline opened her eyes and saw her baby girl looking up at her. "One day, I am going to tell you a story," Caroline whispered softly. "It is about a woman who forgot who she was. A woman who let a man convince her that she was small and worthless. A woman who almost lost everything," she went on, as little Ruby stretched and made tiny fists. "And I will tell you how she found her courage again, how she fought her way out of the darkness, and how she built a new life for us from the ashes of her old one." Caroline reached into the crib and gently touched her daughter's cheek. "That woman was your mother, and I want you to always remember that no one is ever too broken to heal. No one is ever so lost that they cannot find their way back home, and no one can ever silence you if you choose to use your voice." Ruby's tiny fingers wrapped around her mother's with surprising strength. "We are going to be okay," Caroline whispered. "In fact, we are going to be much more than just okay. We are going to be whatever we want to be." As night fell over the city, thousands of lights began to glitter outside her window. This was the start of a new chapter. Caroline picked her daughter up, feeling completely at peace. The woman she was before that night was gone forever. A stronger, new person stood there instead. She had found the one thing she thought was gone for good: herself. This was not the end of her story. It was a brand new beginning, and she was ready for it. The courtroom was completely full. Reporters had taken every single seat, and news trucks were parked all along the street outside. The media was calling it the trial of the century. Preston Ashworth sat at the defendant's table. In the last year, he looked like he had aged 10 years. His expensive suit hung off his thinner frame, and his famous charming smile was gone. On the witness stand, Caroline looked calm and confident. Her daughter Ruby was safe at home with her grandmother Maggie, who had moved to the city to help her. The prosecutor walked her through her story. Caroline spoke in a clear voice about the illegal business deals, the secret other family, and the years of emotional abuse. She described everything she had desperately uncovered after she ran from the party. Preston's lawyers did everything they could to make her emotional. They suggested she was just a bitter woman trying to get revenge. They claimed that she was only after his money. But Caroline answered every one of their questions with a calm and steady voice. She did not cry once. She never got angry. She just told them the simple truth. After she finished speaking, the jury left the room to make their decision. Caroline's route out of the courtroom took her right past Preston's table. He looked up, his eyes empty. "Was it worth it?" he asked. "Was it worth destroying everything?" She paused and looked at the man she once loved, the man who had broken her world into a million pieces, the same man who, without meaning to, had shown her a strength she never knew she had. "You did this to yourself, Preston," she said softly. "All I did was tell the truth." And with that, she turned her back on him and walked out of the dark courtroom into the bright sunshine. She was walking toward a future that was all hers. The jury only took 4 hours to reach a decision. They found him guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 23 years in a federal prison. Caroline did not clap or cheer. This was not a time to celebrate. It was a time for justice, and justice had finally been served. That evening, she sat in her own apartment, holding her baby Ruby. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled like a million stars on the ground. A set of wind chimes that used to hang on her mother's porch now hung in the nursery, playing a soft, gentle song. She thought about everything that had been stolen from her, but she also thought about everything she had gained. She remembered the scared woman she used to be, and thought about the strong person she had become. One pregnant woman quietly left a fancy celebration, and in less than 24 hours, a billionaire's entire life came crashing down. But that is not the most important part of this story. The real lesson here goes much further. This is the story of a woman who rediscovered the power of her own voice. It is about someone who found her inner courage and created a brand new life from the wreckage of deceit. This story is about bouncing back. It is about healing. It is about the amazing strength that comes out when you decide you will not be silenced. Caroline softly kissed her daughter on the forehead as she looked out at the sparkling city lights. "Once upon a time, there was a woman," she whispered, "who thought she had lost her way. But the truth is, she was not lost at all. She was just waiting for the right moment to find herself again." In her sleep, Ruby let out a gentle smile. The steady sound of the city below was a soothing melody, and Caroline Ashworth, who was now Caroline Brennan, felt truly at home. If you felt a connection to this story and found yourself cheering for Caroline, you are in good company. Many listeners find their own courage reflected in stories just like hers. We would love for you to tell us what you think in the comments below. Let us know what you would have done in Caroline's position. I read every single comment myself, and your personal experiences could become the spark for our next story. For all of our new listeners, we would be so happy if you decided to subscribe and turn on your notifications. We release completely new stories each and every week. Our stories are all about finding your personal strength, getting through tough times, and the amazing power of women who refuse to be quieted. We also hope you will share this story with someone you feel could use this message. Sometimes, just one story can give a person the push they need to start making their own life better. Finally, if this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like. When you support us, you help us share these important messages with more people. Our dedicated team puts a lot of heart and hard work into creating these stories to share valuable lessons with all of you. Each narrative we produce is made with a specific purpose. We want to do more than just entertain. Our goal is to inspire, to support, and to empower every one of you. We are so very grateful to have you in our community. We thank you for being here and making this a special place model